observe, we imagine. And for all of the importance. Is that better? Yes. All right. All right. We are visual creatures. We see, we observe, and we imagine. But for all of the importance that visuals play in our day-to-day lives, I really wonder if we pay enough attention to the importance of visuals in the way we understand and communicate. We're in a visual world. The question is really whether or not we're able to see as much as there is. For many, many years, it was limited in terms of how far beyond our immediate neighborhoods we could see. Today, it's much less so, and that is becoming a destabilizing factor. I may not be an engineer, but I know enough that a structure is only as strong as its foundation and the ground on which it sits. And this has gotten me to begin to consider, what is it that we need to do and know in order to thrive? And in particular, if we believe that literacy is really the cornerstone of our development, is reading, writing, and language, the things we've traditionally held to define literacy, sufficient? I've been on a bit of a journey for the last few years, loosely divided into the past, present, and future. And I begin with looking up, because my journey began in New York City. Now, as a youngster, I certainly had no idea that the architects of the Seagram Building were two of the masters of architecture in the 20th century. But it was clear, even to a child's eye, that something extraordinary was going on there. Perhaps it was the clean lines and the open plaza against the chaos of the city that welcomed people in. But what was really happening there is that that Van der Rohe and Johnson began to reimagine, redefine what architecture, modern architecture was. And instead of simply building a building, they imagined a world and then built it. I also thank a friend of mine in New York for teaching me to look up. But it was on an assignment in Africa where I learned to look down. Anybody here ever seen centipede tracks? How about a walking stick? Well, if you slow down long enough, just slow down for a moment in Africa, you could find a myriad of stories around every watering hole. And they're all clues to the near past and an entire interconnected world that exists together. Now, it gets interesting when you begin to look deep, because there is way much more beneath the surface. So let's play a little game here. Look at the screen. Yes, it's blank. So fill it. Fill it. Just imagine anything. Now, just to try something, think of the ocean. Okay? How many people thought of the ocean, thought of this picture when they thought of the ocean? And how many people thought of the ocean, but maybe a picture a little bit different from this? Okay. Now, let's listen. Now what are you thinking of? All right. So, subtle little suggestions, little clues begin to dial us in. And frankly, this is the way a lot of entertainment works. We begin to align thinking. When you see everybody in a movie theater thinking the same way, that's not an accident, that's by intent. And this is also about visuals and other cues that we use to reconcile. Beautiful, elegant example of using visuals only to describe something. But look out, because Jaws blockbuster movie that it was, really had a dramatic effect on the way we perceive sharks. It's all about fear. But just because it's in a movie doesn't mean it's real. Amos Nahum is a friend of mine and a photographer who literally swims with the sharks. Not in the mobster sort of way, but he swims with the sharks by getting to really know their behavior. He took a very dramatic picture, but look what happened.
They just learn how to work with Photoshop and they decide to remove the fish out of the picture. We create a much more dramatic image now, right? It's different than before.
So he took a dramatic shot, but because it was in a stock photo agency and was able to be used by creative agencies, they took a dramatic shot and made it sensational. What that's doing is it's altering the gap between fact and fiction. In the visual effects industry that I come out of, we get extra points when we create something that you cannot tell fact from fiction. Reality is blurred. But now, in an era where it's hard to tell the difference, it's changing. That gap is widening and, in fact, reversing places. And what this is doing, while it's a lot of fun when you're doing it in the service of entertainment, in reality, it's another story. And it's begging us to think differently about how we understand the cues. News is another great example. Our perception of things is a conditioned response. We know what news looks like, so if it's on the news, if it looks like news, it is news, and it must be true. But it's not always the case, which is calling on us to really execute a certain kind of mental dexterity. We need to be able to sort out and separate the difference between fact and fiction. And images play a huge role in that. People are using the images as a shortcut in many cases because we can recognize them so much faster. To make sense of letters as being words takes at least 500 milliseconds, which, although that's quick, compare that to the 13 milliseconds that it takes to simply recognize a shape. You see a shape, you instantly get an idea of what it is. Most of the time, our brains do a pretty good job in reconciling these differences. We recognize what's familiar. It works a lot like compression software. It pays attention to the differences, and it fills the blanks in with memory and intuition to make sense of it all. And most of the time, it works out pretty well. But we are storytellers by nature. And when we see things or experience things, we want to share those ideas. Now, one of the things that's been happening over the years is we've gone from a natural medium, which is firsthand experience, to all sorts of transitory and transportation media that have allowed us over the years to experience something firsthand and then fulfill our desire to share it and communicate it to others. So we've evolved from firsthand reality to telling stories about it, to drawing pictures, cave paintings, writing, language, photos, movies, and now we're seeing the introduction of virtual reality. And it's this last step that actually is fascinating right now, because I believe we are returning to a much more natural way of communication and expression. And I think it holds all kinds of opportunities for us. However, it's going to invite us to reimagine what it means to be literate today. Is it just about being able to read and write, understand language, or is it something more? Are we able to tell the difference between that fact and fiction? What do we need to know, and what does it do to the way we communicate, the way we educate, the way we express ourselves to one another? I'm really excited about visual literacy because I think that as much as we have chosen to educate, we've lost sight sometimes of how we learn and how we enable people to express their understanding. What do these things mean? For me, visual literacy creates a tremendous opportunity to engage people who, in this quest for a literate society, has at the same time perhaps marginalized some people who could be otherwise incredibly productive and engaged citizens. First of all, visual language is natural. It transcends borders, cultures, almost everything. It's intuitive. It's empowering. Suddenly people are not limited by their command of a language in particular, but can express themselves beyond. It's engaging. People respond to imagery. If you're in a meeting and you're showing a design, that is an immediate thing. It is participatory. Most people who are creating images are doing so in a hands-on way. Not everybody is good with word processing or crafting an extensive treatise on something. Sometimes it's just as simple as a matter of being able to work together. It has a tendency to be much more collaborative. And once you have this whole additional set of individuals who are able to participate and engage in the experience of demonstrating their knowledge and learning, it's incredibly inspiring to them to be able to engage. It's also inspiring to begin to see the results. And you see it in classrooms already as more and more visual tools are being introduced into the classroom. So as I begin to wind down, I want to share with you just a little bit of my current observations. This kind of design approach, this sort of new visual language, is working its way across many, many industries. Just down the street at USC, Alex McDowell, who's a production designer, has set up the World Building Lab. And in that lab, where he's initially rethought the entire concept of designing pictures, not necessarily designing and building sets, but actually imagining the whole world that's being created and the many stories that will operate within it, he has employed and taken those disciplines out into the commercial world. And in fact, he and some colleagues are working on a project right here in downtown LA to imagine what the city will be like years from now. And it goes beyond traditional urban design. What I'm also seeing with visuals, especially with the new virtual reality tools and the new HoloLens mixed reality that Microsoft is rolling out, and if any of you have ever seen the E3 Minecraft demo, it is very cool. Just imagine putting an architectural model on a desk and then being able to work through it. So these are exciting ways to draw people in to that natural environment and experience firsthand. It's also, one last item on the virtual reality. If you can imagine, I was downstairs in this building just last week walking through a construction site thanks to an NVIDIA product called DesignWorks VR. And I don't work for them, but it really is allowing you to go beyond what you're perhaps accustomed to with BIM. So when the Seagram building was built, they imagined a world that would evolve around it. When Spielberg produced Jaws, he remembered the great moments of movies in the past, but also was conscious of what the audience experience would be watching his film. And as I look to the future, it's not in some distant place, but it's right here today. The one thing that each of us who are perhaps a little more fluent in visual communication may need to stay aware of is that others are just learning, and we have an opportunity to bring them along. And when we do, we have that opportunity to look up, look down, and look out. And we could look to the future with an eye to the past and be ever mindful and honor the present. I thank you.